Okay, we're live. Welcome to Dive into Worldbuilding, and we managed to get everybody in that needed to be in today. So yay! Sometimes that's a real challenge. But today we're talking about games, and this is something that like I had set aside my notes from last week, where Morgan was like, "We should talk about vermin," and I'm like, "Oh, I can't remember what the topic is," and we've been cleaning out a ton of rooms in the house, and one of the things that has come out is that we have tons and tons and tons of games that we don't play. So I thought talking about games would be really fun, in part because there are games in my novel, but not all novels have games, and so I thought it'd be kind of fun to talk about. Uh, really, that was you, Che? Sorry, Che.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
I didn't mean to give all cred to Morgan there. I
Oh,
think she's the one who mentioned it at the end of the last hangout. That could be why.
Okay.
You probably came up with it earlier. Anyway, so games. And the one novel that I can think of that had a lot of games in it was Split Infinity by Pierce Anthony.
Oh, yeah.
That started out with this character who was like an expert game player.
Yeah.
And the whole deal was that he had sussed out the strategy for every game, and he was in part of this competition where, he was playing game after game after game, and the way that Anthony described it made it seem like, of course, he was going to win all the games because he figured out the strategy. And anyway,
well, they had in those books, the entire culture was based around a game system.
Yeah. Game competitions, right?
Yeah. And that was how you it was sort of your classic dystopic, the higher ups employ people to play games on their behalf, and your status in the culture, or your status in the one percenters, was based on how good your gamers were. And presumably, once you, as a game player, you were basically a serf for one of these one percenters. You could eventually buy your way out. There was a bit of the Roman gladiatorial idea there, right? And then, of course, you would promptly be taken advantage of and have all your money taken and be sent back. But our character was smarter than that, so.
Yeah, smarter, much smarter. Because all those protagonist types are so much smarter.
They're either clever, or they have people who want them, who are willing to put them up as the sort of meat shield for whatever their revolution or their secret plan or whatever is. So
yeah.
If our hero is not clever, there are clever people holding them up, saying, "Look, here's the clever one."
Exactly. So how many of you have designed a game before? I know at least one of you.
Maybe a couple.
Maybe a lot.
It's different though when you're building a game for world building purposes, right? Mm-hmm. It's very. I mean, for speaking from the game developers I know who write literature, right? It's very different designing a game for a world than it is designing a game that's actually going to be played, by people on a regular basis. And I know a couple examples. I think was it called Patrick Rothfuss's TAC is one that's making the rounds right now, that he put in one of his books, and now they've turned it into an actual physical game. But I don't know if he I don't believe he completely designed the game before he put it in the book. He just sort of sketched the outlines, and then a game designer came in and said, "Here's what."
I think in a way, unless the actual gameplay is going to be critical to your plot,
sure,
there's not a lot of point to designing every last detail of the gameplay, right? I mean, so in my novel, I have 2 games that I can think of off the top of my head, and I'll tell you a little bit about them. One of them is called Kazel Marbles, and it's a little bit like what we used to call Chinese checkers. You have a round board. It's made of obsidian. It has little cradles for the marbles. You have two colors of marbles, and the idea is to outmaneuver your opponent and get across to the other side of the board. Right? And that's basically all I know about it. It's a strategy game. I have no idea how you move the pieces, right? But I know that it's a slowish game, and it takes some time to play, right? So that's as much as I needed to know for the purposes of putting it in the story. And in fact, there are people play it in the story, but the exact moves that they make are not important.
Right.
So for example, one of the places where it appears is that one of the characters by the name of Piaris, who's 11 years old, starts playing it with his cousin's bodyguard, a man by the name of Arisin Variga. And they're not supposed to be playing a game together, and that's the whole point. Right? Nobody cares what the moves are, but they're sitting there in the middle of a game, and they're of different castes, and they are not supposed to be playing a game together.
Right.
And so one of my characters walks in and is like, "What are you doing fraternizing with this bodyguard? Stop it this instant." And it turns into this whole big deal of that, Piaris and Variga had actually made a bet that this guy was going to come in and stop them before they could finish the game. So it ends up segueing into something else. But Kazel Marbles is the game that they were playing, and then after something quite terrible happens to the bodyguard, I actually revisit the game later because one of the other characters sort of wanders into the room and starts like cleaning up and replacing all of the Kazel marbles in their original configuration. And then Piaris comes in and goes, "Wait, that was our game. I was playing it with him, and now I'm never going to be able to put it back." And the other character's like, "I'm so sorry," right? But it's more thematic, right? What it's doing is it's representing engagement in a way, right? It's representing engagement and a little bit of competition, and serving to show that there are certain type of people who are not supposed to engage with one another in competition. But also, it kind of is representing their relationship at a certain point. There's also a way in which it represents things that can't be undone, right? Where, like, when this character comes in and starts putting all the marbles back, not realizing that this was the game that Piaris had been playing with Variga before Variga went into the hospital, right? And to this other character, it means, oh my gosh, yet again, I've done something that I can't take back because I can't remember where all the pieces were, right? So the game is not there to be about the gameplay.
Right.
And then the last place it appears is when there's this very fraught relationship between a woman and her servant, and she wants to talk to him about something really important and doesn't know how, and she invites him to come out and play this game with her. And he's all, I'm supposed to sit at the table with you and play a game? Like, really? And she's like, sure, we can totally do that. And his issue is that he has a terrible problem with the idea that he should actually engage in a competition with her. So, in fact, they never actually end up playing the game.
Right.
Because, she explains what the object of the game is, and his response is, then must one of us win? Right? because he can't conceive of engaging in that kind of a competition where he and his mistress, one of them would have to win.
Right.
Because there would be no way for them to compete in that way without it being unfair.
Right.
So it's emblematic of the power relationship between them in that case. So I'm giving you that example to show you what a game can do in terms of exemplifying relationships between people, I guess.
Yeah.
Rather than being about the gameplay.
Well, they are. I mean, games are kind of a universal metaphor for power plays and for power struggles. And chess has shown up in science fiction over and over and over again as either an illustration or even in standard fiction, right? Chess is used as sort of a hey, look, this person is smarter than you, right? It's used as a reveal to change up power dynamics. There was a run of 70s science fiction where chess was being used as sort of a communications transit between different races. Like David Gerald's Chess with the Dragon, and it wasn't David Niven did one also that involved chess games with an alicorn, right, for the fate of the planet, right? So games tend to be used either to reflect a power dynamic or to change a power dynamic. We have the sort of the historical classic, right? If you can play a game with the devil and win,
yeah.
You can save your soul or you can get a favor. Same with fairies, the fae and the fair folk in. I'm not sure how much of it is actual British and Irish history and how much of it is recent mashups of those histories, but same sort of thing. You get brought into a game, and if you can win, then you can escape, or you're set free, or you get your heart's desire, or something like that.
Right,
so,
and some people play games with death, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, that's a really, really good point. And it almost is like the single combat, right?
Yeah.
Where instead of armies clashing, you say, well, we're going to agree to do single combat, right? And in a way, it's like a microcosm of the whole, right? It's not exactly a game because it's single combat, but at the same time, you're saying, okay, we're going to represent the larger struggle using the smaller struggle.
Right.
And so games would be sort of like one step down from that. Yeah. The other thing I think that you can do with games is you can have them reflect the world that they are in. And just by having them there and having them constituted in a particular way. Like what the game, I'm trying to think of how to put this, but what the game is made of. Like playing with knuckle bones, for example.
Sure.
You had to get those knuckle bones somewhere, right? I mean, I don't even know how you would play with knuckle bones because I don't even know what the knuckle bones would be. But I guess maybe like carpal bones, like wrist bones.
They're not human knuckle bones. They're usually pig.
Pig.
And
they're knuckle bones actually. Knuckle bones?
They're kind of squarish. So they function kind of like dice.
Right.
And then whichever side, and whichever side lands up is your, your number or your, however many, like, it's hard to describe them. They're kind of squarish looking, but they're kind of bumpy at the same time, so they don't all roll exactly the same way.
Right.
But,
well, I mean, it would make it good for a game of chance, right?
Sure. Well, and they're an easy, exotic sounding
Right.
or an easy period-sounding game to throw in there, right? I don't know very many people who actually know the rules to Knucklebones. If there are any rules, any set rules that anybody's thinking of, but you throw Knucklebones in, and it's either a game of chance or it's a reading the runes type situation.
Yeah.
Right. So, and it's a shorthand, right, for saying there's a thing.
Yeah.
Without getting too deep into it.
If you get to just dice, then it's helpful if you have some sense of what the dice are made of. Are they knuckle bones, or are they made of wood, or where are you in your technology? Because if you do plastic dice,
they made of wood? Are they 20-sided plastic dice?
Right. Or are they?
They actually have 20-sided stone dice from Golden Age Greek era. So they've been around for a long time.
Ancient Greeks.
No, I remember seeing stone dice come by and going, what? And obviously, there's a certain fundamental geometry to the 20-sided thing, because the stone 20-sided dice, they look pretty much exactly like the modern, plastic 20-sided dice, which is pretty astonishing when you think about it. But I mean, of course, it has to do with the way that you put angles onto a thing to make it a 20-sided shape. Three-dimensional shape. So I'm going to mention the other game that I put into my story, which is something that I thought was not so... Okay, so Queso Marbles, I imagined that its origin was not very modern. And most likely this other game is not very modern either. Oh, shoot, I've forgotten the name of it. Isn't that funny? But anyway, so I'll just describe it without actually telling you the name, and if I can think of the name, I will say it. But it's called Darely. There we go. Dareli, and it's a card game, and it's about families. And because the nobility in this world is all about competitions between families, this seems like a game that would be very appropriate to them. And that was why I did it, in part to have it be an extra way to illuminate the kinds of political things that are going on between the major noble families in the world. I know very little about it, except that it's almost like our decks of cards, right? In that it has a series of cards that belong to a quote-unquote, like what we'd call a suit, except that the suits are actually families. And so you want to make sure you can create alliances between the families and unify the families and do these various things in this card game. And so it's just another thing about World, really, right? And it's sort of like, so it's sort of like the sourcing question here. And I actually haven't done a lot of thinking about what these cards the derelict cards are made of. They're probably made of paper. But you're not going to find anybody outside the nobility playing derelict, because most people can't afford paper. and the people who could would probably not care about these sort of family, so there may be another older game that this grew out of. It may be a specialized form of a game that was a little bit more generic, right? But games do change over time, even if they don't change a lot. And you can actually make up all kinds of, like if you go back into one of those card game books, there are a million games that people have made up to play with the same set of cards, and it's really, really cool. My husband knows, for example, 3 or 4 different ways to play solitaire with the same deck of cards.
Right.
So there's so many more. There's so
Yeah,
many
right.
more. But I was thinking about when going back to where you said, but one of us has to win. I'm thinking at least when my kid was younger, there was a thing about cooperative games just becoming things that they wanted to encourage kids to play. So, what games are you teaching your kids reflects somewhat on you, and then perhaps somewhat on the society that you're building.
Mm-hmm.
So is it are the ruling families or the politicians teaching their kids to play cooperative games, or are they teaching them to be cutthroat card players, or what?
Yeah.
Is
What?
that
Yes.
a thing to?
How are children taught via games? And I was tempted for a while to take the topic and turn it into play, which we can do another time. But this is definitely relevant to that as well. How are children taught via games? You know, what values come out of the game?
Well, they do. The ruling class kids being taught to play the cutthroat version of any game, right? To win at all costs is becoming it's something that I'm seeing repeatedly as well. Again, I was Dark Matter, for example, which just came back on Sci-Fi last season. They have a run of one of the backstories for one of the characters involves the older brother and the younger brother doing swordplay and doing fencing, and then the one that is willing to kill the other one clearly must be the one who will be the ruler, and it sets up this internal conflict between the two siblings. And so those types of things keep popping up repeatedly in literature, whether it's a tabletop game or a card game, or whether it's a friendly running competition or something like that. It seems to be a shorthand for a relationship between two characters, usually two siblings, or a child from the main line of the family and a child from the cadet line of the family. That
Right.
it represents the conflict between them.
Right. So it's actually very convenient as a thing to sort of. It really does. I mean, I think it really does. Gameplay really does encapsulate a relationship. In the case of Split Infinity, it's sort of a societal relationship, which is relatively unusual. But in a lot of cases, it's gameplay is representing a personal relationship between two people, and how they play is going to be indicative of what their relationship is like. I was actually going to. I wanted to mention one thing, which is that we heard a story about a competition for, I believe it was like claiming that basically there were these two guys who were trying to be heir, and they wanted to be King of Ireland, right? And I may be getting some details of this wrong, but the idea was they went out into the ocean on ships.
Uh-huh.
And then they made this deal that whoever's hand touched the shore first would become the next king. And one of the guys was losing by a very, very small amount. And he chopped his hand off and threw it onto the shore.
Oh, God. Oh, my God.
And in so doing, he became the king.
He wanted a king, right?
Yep.
I was also thinking of Gattaca. Remember, there's the two brothers in Gattaca, one of whom is the genetically engineered chosen child, and the other of whom is the natural born love child.
Right.
And they have this swimming competition where they swim out into the ocean to see how far they can go, and then they come back. And then the last time they see each other, they both go swimming, and the lesser child, the one who is natural born, beats his brother. which sort of starts the brother onto this downward spiral of maybe I'm not as good as I'm supposed to be engineered to be, and catapults the natural-born brother sort of into I can do whatever the hell I put my mind to mindset. And at the very end, they meet again and they have this discussion, and the older brother's like, "How did you beat me?" Or the younger brother, and the older brother's like, "Well, I just didn't save anything for the trip back." The idea being that I went for it completely. I didn't worry about whether or not I'd have to make it back to shoreline, right? I didn't out at the halfway point. And so, but it sort of became the metaphor for these two characters. As a game, it's a simple competition: who can swim farthest out, right? But as not just a metaphor for the relationship of the two brothers, but for the whole overarching idea behind the story that, just because you're engineered to be perfect doesn't mean you're not going to be flawed.
Right.
So.
I'm writing notes.
I'll fill the space. Since games are my thing. There was a game with
Kimberly, just for a second, let me tell you that your sound is really staticky right now.
Okay, let me see if
it's been going on for a while, but if you're going to, I really want to hear what you have to say very clearly. That might be nice.
Hang on.
So we can find a way to resolve it.
Let me see if I can switch my mic up. In a second, let me switch my...
So let me look through I'm going to look through the sidebar here and see if I can come up with some other things. So Che's talking about things that were used for dice: bone, ivory, stone, and gemstones. Things that were hard enough to hold edges, almost never would because it was too soft. Good point. Let's see. Games like Sorry that set you up to have to be mean to people. Yeah. That's a whole can of worms right there. maybe we could talk about it again in a minute, because I could never do that. That was one of my downfalls as a game player as a kid. And let's see. Jane Austen. Did you have a particular game? I mean, so is it the charades game?
No, actually there was like this kind of word game they were playing at a picnic. I think it's been a while since I've read Emma.
Yeah.
But yeah, they play a lot of charades and stuff, and riddle games and things and letters. But there was in Emma, she makes fun of this really annoying woman who never shuts up. And everybody, kind of, but the fact that, it really, kind of, one of the characters calls her out on making fun of, this poorer woman of lower station in public.
Right.
And that kind of forces her to look at her own behavior.
Yeah. Well, they can be games can be a disguise for a certain type of communication, for sure. I was just kidding. Right. Or not. Yeah. And then, of course, you have going down the list here, Monopoly, which is one of my least favorite games because it requires you to be so utterly cutthroat and horrible. I mean, I have a really hard time with these games where somebody has to win, and that's one of the reasons why I ended up putting that in the story with one of my characters. I don't even want to start on this because I don't want to treat you like my enemy. Is a lot of the way I come into a game. So Monopoly is very difficult for me. I enjoy the beginning of it, but past a certain point, I'm like, okay, I'm done. I'm not playing this anymore. We had fun building some things, buying things. Now we're going to stop. I mean, I like Settlers of Catan because even if I lose, I feel like I built some things.
Sure.
Right?
Well,
Um,
that's in games that's becoming more prevalent. I mean, just in like video games and stuff, we're seeing the sort of the rise of the
Yeah.
sandbox game,
yeah,
where the whole point is building stuff, and you can get competitive in it, but really, that's not the point. And you do
right.
find the people who get competitive sort of get walled off. It's like, okay, there's a PvP area, you guys can go beat each other with sticks over there, but we've got a castle that we're working on, and we've got farms, and we've got, 500 cows that we need to make sure don't drown because there's a lake nearby, and so.
Yeah, and I think there's also the whole Minecraft is a really interesting game because it's so much based on building things,
Mhm.
and so your ability to build things is actually a really big deal in that game.
Mhm.
And I see, like there are whole YouTubers who their basic thing is telling you new techniques for how to build stuff in Minecraft, which I think is actually kind of cool, right?
Sure.
Um, um, and it's it's good for a lot of different stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, opponent, let's see, opponent is enemy.
It's very interesting too in like the MMOs. You have a core group of people who only want to fight the AIs. Right?
Mm-hmm.
They only want to fight the in-game critters, and they don't want to fight other people. Right? So, first of all, playing versus a live human is very different versus playing against a computer. But in any type of game, it's a very different experience. But you run into the same kind of fragmentation where you have some servers, some people that are hosting copies of the game that are strictly for role playing. Right, and the whole point of being on that server is to roleplay your character. And you have some, it's all PvP. So if you show up on that server, you're fair game, and everybody else is fair game. And so
Right.
people do tend to compartmentalize based on the experience that they want to get. And the largest number of people out there want to play versus the computer.
Right.
That's the largest group of people who want to follow the story. They want to collect all the pieces. They want to have the shoulder pads out to here with the purple glowy flashy things on top of it,
Yeah.
right?
I want the cool clothes.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I have a whole like lecture based on dress up for games, because it really is I mean, my boys will spend hours customizing their characters. And and it does nothing. It's not like it adds points in many cases, or it doesn't make them bigger or stronger or faster.
It looks cool.
It just makes them look more awesome. So
Looking awesome is a really legitimate goal in life.
It totally is.
it kind of is. I mean, it's your avatar. It's one of the jokes for The Sims was that the first Sim everybody creates is themselves. Right? They create an analog of themselves, and then once they figure out that in the larger game world they're kind of boring, then they go and they start to go nuts, right, and create families and all kinds of stuff. But even in me-based games for Nintendo, like the first thing everybody creates in Tamagotchi Life is one of the big ones right now.
Yeah.
Everybody creates themselves first. They create a little avatar that looks just like them, or at least as close as possible. And then over time, it gets more and more fantastic, or they'll create more versions of themselves as they get more comfortable with expressing the parts of themselves that they might not bring out in day-to-day life.
Yeah. Well, I think it's worth mentioning at this point, because we've been doing a little bit of this online gaming stuff, that you can plan and plan and plan a game, but once you get people playing it, it will develop its own culture.
Oh yeah.
Oh my god! I know. There was okay. I don't know. You guys remember Spore?
Yeah.
Where you could like evolve your own planet, and of course, the first thing everyone did was make penis aliens. Like, they literally, and there was like, I saw like a whole, like, somebody put together, like, I don't know, it was like a YouTube montage of everybody's like penis-shaped aliens that they evolved on their planet.
Oh yeah.
And I don't think that the game makers thought of that. I mean, but it's like that was like the first thing everyone did.
Oh yeah, they did. They
Just
brought.
truth be told, we never actually did that when we had Spore, but I can see why other people might.
Well,
They
I
did.
think they took it out, sort of. Like somehow, like those might have been beta players or something, but
Oh,
it was like,
They tried, but
oh,
the
they tried.
tools didn't. I mean, it was a. But what they started doing is they would start to check. So you have to submit an image of your alien in order to
Okay.
get it out into the broader game world and make it a
Okay,
public
yeah,
thing. And so
I was
that's
wondering
what they were
how they
checking.
handled that.
But the best part is, so they did their reveal at the big gaming conference, and they had Robin Williams up there as sort of the keynote for bringing out Spore, because he was a big game player, and he's up there, and they're having him demonstrate the creature creator aspect, and the first thing he creates is a penis. And it's up there for like 3 seconds, and the whole audience cracks up. And then he quickly, like, before the guy can turn around, he starts changing it up, right? And this is Robin Williams. He's like playing to the crowd, and and like everybody's like, "What did you expect?" But it was hysterical, because you're exactly right. Everybody who's ever played games knows the first thing you're going to make is a penis, right? And the fun wears off that fairly quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it didn't, shall we say, continue. But the problem was it was easy to accidentally create one.
Yeah.
Which
Oh
was,
no.
Well, I mean, because people have these mechanisms by which they, imagine faces where there are none, and all that kind of stuff. So you really have to do a lot to get people to go, "Oh my God," Oh, the dirty mind kicks in. I mean, it was Tom Lehrer who said that when correctly viewed, everything is lewd.
Yes.
It's not far off. So, well, let's not go that direction, Che. I wanted to go with Kimberly's thermonuclear war example, and think about, I mean, I guess that war games is a glorification, not a glorification, a glorified example of a game being representative of a larger relationship or a larger conflict, right? Mm-hmm. In this case, literally connected to a larger conflict, and nobody knows it. But that was a really, really interesting movie, obviously, because I hadn't quite... I don't think I'd ever seen the idea of a game writ large being handled quite in that way before.
Yeah, it was unusual in that idea that the game reflected a real life potential outcome, which was sort of the underlying conflict of the entire of the entire story, and part of the point of the story was the illusion, right, of the everybody knows that actually playing through this game is a bad idea, right? All the adults, all the generals, all of the people involved are perfectly aware that if you ever actually launch the nukes, it's just a bad end for everybody on the planet. Yeah. But the innocence of the computer, which just regards it as a game and has to play through the scenarios, was, the computer was a metaphor almost for the next generation. Yeah. Right, coming into it with the idea that this scenario has been set up and there is no win. So it was very It was a very broad take, I think, and it was an interesting way to make that connection. And there were a couple of clones at the time, but I don't think anybody has taken the metaphor to that level since then. I think there was they went, as opposed to going higher concept, they went lower concept and started directing those types of movies at the 10-year-old set, 11-year-old set.
There were a couple of hey, if you get to the 256th level in this video game, it turns out there's the secret Russian spy plans for when they're going to launch their nukes or something like that. So they went.
Well, and there's also the Spy Kids movies.
Oh yeah.
That at least one of which involves a game that turns real.
Right.
A game that turns real is not that uncommon as a trope at this point.
No, that's true.
No.
That's true. Who is it? Daniel Suarez's Damon does that, where they take a game and they make components of it real. And they actually build a real life economy based on sort of an RPG type in-game economy, which works surprisingly well, which is probably why it's fiction. But
yeah,
but they also go to the trouble of actually building out in-game opponents and in-game controls, which was an interesting. That was sort of the sexy take was okay, we have evil robot bikes in the game, and look, we can build evil robot bikes in real life and have them do the same thing, and so it's that was sort of the hook, right? And then we get deeper into sharing economies based on things like game quests and all that kind of stuff, but
yeah. Well, and the links, the links between the game world and the real world are interesting, and I think people keep playing with them because there are some ways that games both reflect and influence real life. It's not like what people used to say in the 80s that that video game violence directly causes violence.
Right.
But on the other hand,
indeed worship Satan.
Right, exactly. Worship Satan, yeah, all that stuff. But I was going to say that if you watch Anita Sarkeesian's videos, there is a level on which gameplay and in particular what she's looking at is the way that women are treated in games. It can have an influence on the way that somebody categorizes or their expectations for female characters in real life. So, so fiction is even fiction in games are never solely fiction in games, even though I don't think you can draw these really super direct connections between one thing and another. It's I think in some ways the ways that we can objectify people in games is a reflection of the way that we can objectify people in real life, rather than an impetus for objectifying people in real life. I suppose it goes both ways, but it's interesting. It is. It does go back and forth, and yes, what Morgan said in the chat bar here, it's a reason it's so important to improve the representation of female characters in games, and people of color in games, and disabled people in games, and basically all of the above, right? It's an argument for why we should try to create utopias in a sense, right? Because creating realism is one thing, and we don't really create realism all that often.
No.
But even realism can be limited. So, so it's kind of interesting.
Well, I think games are an opportunity, right? Everything changes going forward, right? Every generation improves on the previous generation. Even if it's a small improvement, most of the time there is an improvement. And one of the ways you do that is you do that through the way you teach the following generation, whether it be through increasing representation in games, whether you do it through increasing representation in books, right?
Yep.
Our generation is already screwed up, right? We were raised the way we were raised, and we have to work on ourselves.
Yeah.
But the next generation has the opportunity to take another step forward, right? And the generation after them is going to take another step forward from there. So as long as we keep layering this, trying to layer this equality into our cultural canon, right?
Yep.
it's going to get there. I would like it to get there faster. I would like it if we could suddenly publish a video game that would suddenly make everybody understand.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, wouldn't that be nice?
Wouldn't that be awesome?
Yeah, it would be
But
great.
but the truth is, it's going to take, especially as long as there are pockets that resist,
Mhm.
right? As long as there are groups that are like, well, no, which we have more than a few of,
Yeah.
across the planet, right?
Yeah.
So we've just got to keep layering in there and layering it in there and teach the next generation to be better than we were. And I think, I think our generation is not perfect, but better than the previous, and they're a little bit better than the previous. My grandfather definitely had some less ideal ideas about, various cultures around the world. And his son had somewhat more equal ideas, but wasn't perfect. And, the same with our generation. And my kids are hopefully going to be a little bit better, if I can, keep them on the right track anyway.
Right.
So
But I think, yeah, I'm gonna tie this back to games for just a second, which is that one of the things that we do by playing the game is we change the game.
Yeah.
Right, and that works in culture, but it also works in gameplay. And so the games that we create reflect the culture that we are a part of, and also change it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And within them, there are these cultures that get created, and that's why we have to not treat those as artificial objects in a way,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because the game culture that gets created inside of the game is actually a real thing that contributes to the larger culture in its own particular way.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of complications because, for example, my son and I have been watching the development and release of Overwatch, which has a lot of really interesting, diverse characters, and we were very impressed by that. But since it's come out, it's apparently gotten a lot of kind of ugly stuff going on in the participant culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's always complicated, right? Like there's always this complication, and you can never quite, I mean, this is what happens with emergent systems, right? You can never quite predict what's going to happen with them. But as my son says, you can go in there and nerf and buff things to try to even it out. So yeah,
that's part of the game ultimately. But they'll build it out. Destiny does the same too. Is they've been clamping down, trying to make sure that that you don't end up with a divide between the players. And some players, as soon as those controls start coming in, they're out. Right. They want to jump to the next thing that they can take advantage of.
Right.
And then there are some players that are genuinely interested in making the entire experience better. And I find that studios are starting to target groups of those players, right? Like Riot Games, as an example, they control their culture. So they have an entire judiciary system now by which players can report conduct. They can report good conduct or bad conduct. There are players who serve on what they call tribunals to make basically a jury of your peers to establish whether or not this player was acting out of bounds or whether their behaviors are negative. They have one of the best. It's not perfect, but they do have one of the best systems in place for managing their own culture, and they're one of the few game companies out there that's really owned this microcosm that they've created.
Cool.
And to be honest, because it affects their bottom line. Right. If it becomes a toxic environment, then no one's going to play it, and they're going to lose their money. So.
Right. Well, yeah, and then of course there's the connection back to social media and whether those are game of life sort of things, and what happens when you get toxic cultures in places like Twitter and stuff like that. But that's a topic for another day.
Well, and Morgan's got a great thing here in the side chat too about things like house rules for more traditional games, right? And that you play that into literary stories as well, right? When you have two characters playing, again, back to the idea of games reflecting a power balance, right? Who knows the house rules? Or in what used to always pop up in period literature, right? For fist fights, right? Marquis de Queensberry rules, right? Are we playing? Are we going to do this by the same set? Or dueling, right? If we go back to
changing the rules in the middle of the game, for example, that kind of stuff.
Right.
I'm glad you brought up Scrabble, though, Morgan, because word games are some of the. I'm going to mention them as being some of the games that I just like because they have an empirical thing that you're getting done that's worth doing, in addition to the fact that you happen to be competing against other people for points, right? And there, in fact, are two different ways to play Scrabble. There's the entirely points-based way that is actually, the people who excel in that are often not native speakers of English because they are going to play entirely for points. They're not going to care about the meanings of the words or the feelings of the words or anything like that. And then there are people who play it because they enjoy the words, right? And playing for points is fine because that's what you do, but it's actually secondary to the idea that you're having fun making some words. And Boggle is another one like that, where you have these words and the words are fun, and you learn different strategies, and in fact you can learn to train your brain to do particular things by playing different games. And maybe this is the point we should end on, is that a lot of games get poo-pooed as not being very important, but they do some very important things to teach us how to think, and give us ways to think about particular situations, which is why simulations are so valuable, and all that kind of stuff. So I think games are actually really important, and glad we got a chance to talk about them today.
Yeah.
But it's 11 o'clock, so we should probably stop. Thank you so much. Let's see, what's next week? The 13th of July. I have a guest next week. Let me see if I can find.
Who?
I'm going to go look it up. I'm going to keep this on, and I'm going to go look it up. So here we go. I am looking it up. Da-da-da. It's making me sign in. That's so unfair. You know, the more clicks it takes me to get to figure out what's going on next week, I'll make you guys wait. All right. Now I can show you. Let's see. Next week. 13th. I know I have somebody next week. Come on, load up my machine. It's because I'm on the video with you. The machine is loading slowly, so like, yeah. Eva Elasig is coming next week. I met her at the Nebulas, and she was very cool. And her name looks like this.
Oh, okay.
And I'm actually mostly guessing on the pronunciation of her name. But she should be coming, and I'm going to be checking in with her and making sure to confirm times and dates and whatever. It should be the same time that we're normally used to. But I will confirm that with her, and if there's any change, I will certainly let you know. But it should be really fun. All right, so now that we know what's happening next week, I'm going to stop the broadcast. Thanks so much.
All right.